me finish this. Let me finish this. Tarek comes here one day and says, we fellow Europeans, we all speak to each other as fellow Europeans. And another, he speaks from Muslim audience and says, we as Muslims. Which is it, Tarek? Which is it? I'm a Muslim. You can't pretend you have two identities. Can't just
This debate was commissioned by the British Council, same organisation whose entire mission is cultural diplomacy, bridge building and mutual understanding between nations. And then they invited Douglas Murray, which is a bit like hiring a fire safety consultant and being surprised when he points out that the building is on fire. What follows is one of the most revealing public exchanges you'll find on the state of Islam in Europe, not because of what Murray says, because of what nobody is able to say back to him, including the host who was completely rattled out of her wits.
Right, folks, so we're going to be taking a look at this video from, I believe it was 2010 with Douglas Murray, who is going to be discussing the challenges with Islamic culture and Western society. Before we look into it, make sure to like the video, subscribe, leave your comments. Follow me at Rafi the Realtor for all of your real estate needs in Miami and the greater South Florida area. And you can support the channel by going to the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description or pinned comment. Without further ado, let's check it out.
Tarek says that Europeans associate Islam with violence. There is some truth in that. There is also a very obvious reason for that, which is that Islam is associated with violence. It was not Buddhists who flew planes into the Twin Towers. It was not Hindus or Jews that blew up the London Underground in buses a few years ago. And that simple fact has to be acknowledged if you're even going to start a dialogue. What is happening, ladies and gentlemen, it's not a pantomime. I'd argue that Europe has done not too badly, considering the circumstances. In the middle of the last century, there was an almost negligible Muslim presence in Europe. At the turn of the 21st, in Western Europe alone, there were 15 to 17 million Muslims. That's a very fast migration, ladies and gentlemen, one of the fastest in human history. And no society would find it easy to deal with that kind of migration. As it happens, European societies, Western European societies have, I think, dealt with this much better than some would. Certainly, Muslims coming to live in Britain and in Western Europe enjoy more rights and better rights, among them freedom of worship, than they do in any Islamic country. We have a problem when the failures of Islam throughout the world, the failures of all Islamic societies come here into Britain. Their intolerance of freedom of conscience, their intolerance of apostates, their intolerance of freedom of expression and freedom of speech, their intolerance of minorities, other religious minorities, sexual minorities, their intolerance of gays, their dislike and distrust of half of the population, women, and many, many other things. And the call, what's more, for a parallel legal system within Britain and European societies. This is monstrous. No other group behaves like this, asks for parallel laws. This is a fundamental problem, and it's one we're going to have to deal with. It's a problem between a society, Western Europe, that believes that laws are based on reason, and Islam that believes that they are based on revelation. Between these two ideas, I'm not sure there is very much compromise for Europe. It is not Europe that has let down its Muslims, but the Muslims of Europe that have let down Europe. This is not solely something which we have to say we can never reconcile. Of course we can reconcile this, but we need to be honest about it. We need to be frank about it, and we cannot avoid things just because they are unpleasant. And if there were one thing I would wish Muslims in Europe could learn today, as fast as possible, it would be this: that you have no right in this society not to be offended. You have no right to say that because you don't like something, you can commit violence, or you would like something to be stopped.
This is such an important principle because the Muslim world is non-democratic. They are used to authoritarian rule, and dissenting opinions are not allowed. There are things that are allowed, there are things that are not allowed. You do not have, meaning, yes, that technically applies to every country, but in the sense where there can be dialogue, there can be disagreement, there's conservative and left wing. There's all kinds of opinions in a democratic society, and when the Muslim world immigrates to Western society, they have a very hard time with people saying things they don't like, and they often get violent when those voices are not shut up. And that goes to say that I disagree with any Jewish voices that try to do that as well. It doesn't help. It doesn't solve anything. You want freedom of speech, religion, etc. That has to apply across the board.
To realize, the Muslims of Europe have to realize that a society in which even your deepest feelings can be trodden upon is the only society worth living in. And the sooner we can learn that, the sooner that Islam can learn that within Europe, the better. It is not Europe that has failed its Muslims. It is Islam that has failed Europe. I'd argue Islam has failed its Muslims. Thank you.
In 2009, the Centre for Muslim Studies, along with the Gallup poll, interviewed 500 British Muslims. Over 99.5% of those British Muslims found homosexual acts unacceptable. What was interesting is that the government has given concession to Muslims as well as other religious organisations. So it seems to me, in fact, this government here is prepared to give religious organisations, including Muslims, the rights over lots of gay men and women.
Okay. Gentleman up there.
You talked about how Europe has dealt with this problem, and what you basically have alluded to in the 6 minutes that you had are that Muslims are a problem. And you're from the organisation called the Centre for Social Cohesion, and it's worrying that to have you talk about these things in this manner. What you are basically alluding to is that Muslims are external to Europe, and it's worrying that you see it that way, because then that means there is no chance of there being any solution to any problem or Muslims being seen as a part of Europe and being seen as European citizens. Thank you.
Gentleman there.
I just want to pick up something that Douglas Murray said. I'd like to ask you, when you talk about the Muslims that are the problem, which Muslims are you talking about? Because you keep slipping in your language to focus on the radicals, the extremists. Okay, right. Maybe that's because that's what you're interested in. But there's another whole set of Muslims out there who are not like that.
Being justified.
I want to make a quick comment to the throwaway comments made by Douglas Murray about Muslim women and Islam and its way it treats women. And I think that Muslim women are quite capable of speaking for themselves. And I think the sort of myths people like you put in the public arena, and I've heard other similar arguments from BNP and all that kind of stuff, they think it justifies their argument by saying, well, Islam treats 50% of its population in a really derogatory and whatever way that...
I love when Muslim women in democratic societies talk about how free they are with this pride like she does. It's like the only reason you are able to do that is because you live in a society that allows it. Not because Islam allows it, because the free society you live in allows it. If you go to Afghanistan right now, lady, you won't have any of the freedoms you boast about.
I'd like to explain.
Okay. You've got a mic. No, that gentleman there, is it? Yeah.
Surely it's Islamic countries and nations and religion who are letting down many Muslims. The lack of correct investment in education, social justice and welfare in their own countries, which has caused so much social migration to Europe, which wouldn't have happened. But surely this lack of contribution to education and ability, especially of women, of freedom, has stopped this growing and contributing to Europe as much as they could.
Let's just take this young lady here with the headscarf, and then we'll come to our panel.
I'm a British female. I love this country, and I give this country. Now you're calling me a problem. I don't think I am. I think you are. Second point is, as a Muslim female, okay, my parents might not let me go somewhere late at night because people are racist to me. They tell me to go back home, and they hurt me. I got hit by 2 white guys, and they laughed at me because I'm a scarfy, okay? Last point is to Mr. Fleming, about the point where you said about the religion, changing religion. Every person has the right to. No one says anything about that. But if you had a daughter or a son that wanted to become a Muslim, would you be happy about that? I don't think so.
Why don't you just address that?
Yeah, I don't think anyone would be happy if their children converted to a religion that they didn't believe in. But the difference between Brits not being happy if one of their kids converts to Islam is very different from being killed for apostasy. Killed. In many Muslim countries, if you stray away from Islam, you are killed, oftentimes by your own parents, by your own father. Like, I'd rather be disliked or disowned than killed. It's just so funny how delusional they are.
Would you mind if, I don't know if you have children, but indeed, would you mind if they became Muslim converts?
I mean, it's their choice. And I can tell you, I am...
But that wasn't what she asked. Would you mind? She said,
no,
would you mind?
No, I wouldn't. Of course not. I mean, I am married to an immigrant myself who comes from another community than the one I come from. So, in fact, I have been living, this kind of experience for the past 30 years. And yes, there were some members of my family who were quite critical about that.
Aesthetically speaking, Douglas Murray, what would you say to that lady?
No, of course it wouldn't bother me. I mean, I would hope that if somebody has access... Look, what Fleming and I are arguing for is that people have the right to access all of the kind of opinions, all of the knowledge that they can. That means, among other things, having, for instance, access to all of the criticism that should be written of the Quran and of Islam. And if they weigh up after knowing all of these things and having access to all of them that they would like to become Muslim, I don't have a problem with that.
All right. Good. You answered the question. Petra.
When my daughter was born in '98, I called her Soraya, which is the Arabic name for Pleiades, because I felt that she needed to have a present for the rest of her life. After 9/11, people asked me whether I had regretted giving her an Arabic name. And I felt sorry for the person who asked that question.
That there's prejudice against...
No, the point I'm making is, and I think it's the point the lady is making as well, that the fact that people are called Muhammad is probably, in the perception of many, putting them in a disadvantage. And of course, I totally disagree.
Okay. You want to come, because I want to get some response to what we heard out, some of the comments our audience made.
I'd just like to make a comment on one of the cases that Petra made, which was about Ahmed Abu Talib, a very distinguished public figure in Holland. What you failed to mention when you mentioned him as a great success story of the Netherlands, which I agree he is that after the murder of Theo van Gogh in 2004, he had to go under 24-hour protection because his name was found on a hit list from a radical cell nearby. We cannot simply take, Petra, the terrific success stories and ignore things like that. It is no small thing that a Muslim politician who speaks out should be targeted for assassination in his home country of the Netherlands.
Yeah, Tariq Ramadan, we get the point, yeah.
Once again, I think that you are taking one story and then
it was the one she took.
No, it is, and many Muslims around the world and in the Netherlands were against that and attacked the small groups that were saying this. And this is the case today in Europe. The discourse that you have is helping to nurture this sense of alienation and not to let the Muslims feel that they are at home. And out of the questions that we got from here, people are saying, you are welcome here, and then in their own country. I'm sorry, I'm at home. I'm at home. What are you talking about? Don't talk about. So, talk to me. I'm sorry. Talk to us or talk to me as a fellow European and not as someone who is an outsider infiltrating the freedom of expression and using this. This is one. Let me finish.
Can I come back to that? No, I'm not saying you're not a European, but I would appreciate the following, which is that don't come to this hall and tell this hall that you're a European, and go to another and talk to an Islamic audience as Islamic brothers. Because that is what you have spent your career doing. Speaking through. Let me finish this. And Tariq comes here one day and says, we fellow Europeans, we all speak to each other as fellow Europeans. And another, he speaks to a Muslim audience and says, we as Muslims. Which is it, Tariq? Which is it?
On this point, this specific point, can Tariq Ramadan be Muslim and European? And is there a problem with standing with Muslims and saying, I'm a fellow Muslim, but also being European? Douglas seems to have a problem with that.
Of course not. Of course not. But I'm not finished. Islam is not a race. And why is this important? Because if it's race, you don't have a chance to change it. I mean, communists were also being discriminated during the Cold War, but that's also an ideology, although another kind of ideology. So you have to insist that Islam is a set of ideas, and you have the freedom to change, to leave, to criticize, to ridicule, and so on and so forth. And it's very, very different
You have
from
problems with freedom of
racism.
speech and what you've encountered amongst some Muslims, is what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, Petra, on this question of identity, I think was the key
I mean,
one.
it almost seems as if the only good Muslim would be an ex-Muslim. And so for me, how enlightened are we if we only welcome people who are like us? I mean, like you and me. I mean, can we actually accept people who think differently? I think this is when our values are really tested.
At this point, the woman who was attacked on the street comes up again.
Douglas, I want to ask you, you heard some of the people from the floor there, the woman complaining about attacks on her because she's described as a scarfie because she wears a head veil. I mean, that is something that you would regret. I mean, that doesn't promote social cohesion,
Nobody thinks that any physical attacks or any such thing could be a good thing to happen. Of course not. Of course there are. Let's make sure we're right.
She's talking about prejudice
exists in society. Let's just be absolutely clear, this is an audience. Prejudice undoubtedly exists in this society. It exists across racial groups, including from minorities to other minorities, after all, which is one of the things we see increasingly in Britain these days. And it is also the case that people, in particularly famously lower socioeconomic groups, are likely to feel hatred for other groups. That is one of the things that has to be tackled, and everyone, I think, in this hall, I'm sure, we're in agreement that that should be tackled. But do not mix up somebody, a thug, a racist, and so on, attacking somebody in a street with the right of Fleming and me to say what we see in the Quran, what we think of Muhammad, and maybe even asserting our right to say so.
Okay, all right.
True. Just to pick up on a couple of people, particularly women, who've said about the terrific things that Islam gives women in terms of rights. The first thing is, yes, in 7th century Arabia, some of this was progressive. In 21st century Britain, it is not. And you have to make that fundamental admission that the Quran is not a document for women's rights in Europe in 2010. It is not.
The closing statement is where everything crystallizes. Murray makes 2 points that the panel spends the rest of the evening not quite recovering from.
Secondly, why is it that only Islamic societies and mosques in this country are places which teach and preach hatred of other minorities? Every single week in this country, there are people on campuses who teach the murder of minorities. Last week, it was somebody who calls for the murder of apostates. The week before, at another university, it was somebody who believes the Jews are fair game. This is not tolerable. It is not tolerable for Muslims. It is not tolerable from anyone else. You, I hope, would agree with me that any minority that engaged in such hatred and bigotry should be criticized. Don't pretend that the cloak of Islam and Islamic belief and religious fervor means that people like us cannot say that people who call for the murder of minorities are not mainstream, are not acceptable, and have to be critiqued.
So, I think the question of immigration and having different societies is very complex. And I absolutely think that different people of different backgrounds can live together. You see it all the time. But 2 things need to happen. The host country needs to have strict boundaries on what is okay and acceptable and what is not, and they need to enforce that. They need to be strict with that. And the people living in the country, whether they're permanent citizens or residents, or whatever it is, if they are not from that country for generations and generations and generations, they have to respect the law of the land. And both of those things need to happen at the same time, I think, in order for cohesion to happen and for peace to exist. Leave your comments. I would love to hear from you. You can like the video, subscribe to the channel, support the channel via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description or pinned comment. You can follow me at Rafi the Realtor on Instagram for all of your real estate needs in South Florida. And I look forward to you tuning into the next one. Until next time, peace.